In a major move that is already sending shockwaves across Africa and rattling the comfort zones of old power structures, the African Union has officially backed a campaign to end the global use of the 16th century Mercator world map in favor of one that finally shows Africa's true size. For too long, the world has looked at Africa through a shrunken, distorted lens, literally, and the African Union is now saying, enough is enough. This is not just about cartography. It's about reclaiming identity, reshaping narratives, and dismantling centuries-old lies. But here's the burning question. How many of us actually realize that the map we grew up seeing in classrooms, on news channels, and in Google searches has been quietly lying to us for centuries? To understand the issue at hand, we must first circle back to the Mercator Projection, crafted by cartographer Gerardus Mercator in 1569 for the noble purpose of aiding sea navigation. Sure, it was groundbreaking in its time. Sailors loved it because it preserved straight-line courses across the oceans. But here's the problem. It wildly distorts the relative size of landmasses. Areas near the poles, like Greenland and North America, look absurdly large, while regions closer to the equator, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, are squeezed into smaller shapes than reality. The result? Greenland appears roughly the same size as Africa on paper, when in reality, Africa is about 14 times larger. Can you see the hidden politics in that? For centuries, this distortion went largely unquestioned. After all, the colonial powers that dominated the 16th to 20th centuries had little interest in visually amplifying Africa's scale, potential, or strategic importance. A map that quietly diminished Africa's presence reinforced the narrative that this was a small, marginal, exploitable space on the globe, not the resource-rich, culturally diverse, and economically vital giant it truly is. Experts have long warned that this isn't just a harmless quirk of map design. It's a visual weapon of perception, and when perception shapes reality, the damage runs deep. Think about it. When Africa is made to look smaller than Europe, when the sheer scale of its 54 nations is visually diminished, what subconscious message does that send to children learning geography for the first time? How does it shape the thinking of investors deciding where to pour billions of dollars? What impact does it have on the policymakers in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing, who look at these maps and decide Africa's place in global strategy? This is not just a matter of drawing lines on paper. It's about the psychological architecture of global power. The effects of this distortion ripple through every layer of society. In education, generations have grown up believing a version of geography that strips Africa of its actual size and importance. In economics, the shrunken map feeds into a subconscious underestimation of Africa's markets, landmass, and strategic resources, potentially affecting foreign investment flows. In media, news graphics and infographics reinforce the same old story, where Africa looks like a small developing side player rather than a heavyweight. In culture, even Africans themselves sometimes internalize the lie, believing their continent to be less significant on the global stage. And historically, the Mercator Projection's endurance feels like a colonial hangover, a remnant of a time when maps were as much about power and dominance as they were about geography. No wonder the African Union has thrown its full weight behind the Correct the Map campaign, driven by advocacy groups like Africa No Filter and Speak Up Africa. This movement is not merely about replacing one map with another. It's about dismantling the longest-running misinformation campaign in history. According to campaigners, the preferred alternative is the Equal Earth Projection, developed in 2018, which maintains a visually appealing layout while accurately reflecting the true size of continents. The plan? Get this map into every African classroom, replace outdated visuals in the media, and demand that international organizations, including the UN, the World Bank, and even tech giants like Google, adopt it as the standard. The African Union's deputy chairperson has said this push aligns with Africa's broader mission to reclaim its rightful place on the global stage, especially amid growing calls for reparations for colonialism and slavery. Now, imagine what would happen if the world suddenly saw Africa as it really is. no longer a small, manageable corner of the global south, but a vast expanse dwarfing much of Europe, capable of holding the United States, China, India, and still having room to spare. Would investment strategies change? Would political negotiations start on a more equal footing? Would the average African child grow up with a deeper sense of pride in their home continent? Would media outlets finally stop talking about Africa as though it were a single country? Of course, perspectives on this issue vary. From the African side, this is long overdue justice, a visual restoration of truth that should have happened decades ago. Many African scholars and leaders view the Mercator map as a relic of a world order that placed Europe at the center and distorted everyone else into the periphery. For them, adopting a truthful map is as much about decolonizing the mind as it is about geography. On the other hand, in much of the Western world, the Mercator map is seen as just tradition, a familiar tool that has been around for centuries. Some argue that changing it might confuse people or disrupt existing navigational standards, while others dismiss the idea that such a change would have any meaningful real-world impact. But perhaps that's the point. The refusal to acknowledge the deeper implications reveals just how entrenched these distortions are in the global psyche. Yet there are signs of movement. Google Maps, for instance, abandoned Mercator on its desktop platform in 2018 in favor of a 3D globe that reflects real proportions, though its mobile app still defaults to the old projection. The World Bank has reportedly begun phasing out Mercator maps for certain uses. Even in the Caribbean, the Reparations Commission has expressed support for the Equal Earth projection, calling it a rejection of the Mercator map's ideology of power and dominance. Slowly, the cracks in the old world order's cartographic armor are beginning to show. In the end, the African Union's stance is more than symbolic. It is a declaration that Africa will no longer tolerate being visually diminished, not in classrooms, not in boardrooms, and not on the world stage. This is about telling the truth and making the world see that truth every time they look at a map. For too long, the Mercator projection has quietly shaped the way billions of people perceive our planet, with Africa cast in a role far smaller than reality. Correcting that is not just a cartographic update, it's an act of reclaiming power. And when you change the way the world sees Africa, you just might change the way the world treats Africa. The question now is, how long before the rest of the world catches up? Your perspective matters. Do you support the redrawing of the world map showing Africa's true size? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments section below. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the New Africa channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our informative future videos. Stay informed, stay engaged, and thank you for watching.